I don't know if Babylon was a historical location in Mesopotamia or an astronomical name reassigned to a place that was never called such because, as I've cited in previous work, Rome was called Babylon in the Bible. However, even if the name Babylon is irrelevant to the Mesopotamian region, the historical record indicates that the peoples of those regions revered the moon more than the sun, whereas the Western world revered the sun more than the moon. There is a generalization that moon worship transitioned to sun worship, but Lockyer touched upon an idea that explains the differences more realistically. In referencing so-called Babylonians measuring time, in addition to the months being reckoned best by the moon's cycle, he wrote, Don Astor. Page 227, in Babylonia, too, where much desert travel had to be undertaken at night, the movements of the moon would be naturally watched with great care. Europeans don't have this issue the further north from the Mediterranean they dwell. They face a different one, which is that cloud cover generally blocks the stars, clear skies aren't as common. The moon's inconsistent placement at night isn't reliable for traveling as much as it is in arid regions. These conditions enable Europeans to travel during the day and night without worrying about things like heat exhaustion and other dangerous conditions, and the weather lends itself to reckoning the sun and using it for navigation purposes. As long as the sun and the circumpolar stars are somewhat visible, people can get their bearings north of the equator. The sun becomes much more significant the further south one gets. That's not to say that other cultures wouldn't be able to utilize these things, but the conditions would enable Europeans to figure out the significance of the sun's declination as they traveled about more freely due to the climate and terrain lending itself to supporting life in their part of the world. The winter forced Europeans to take more precautions, while the winter is the best time of year to observe the stars in regions that are closer to the equator. Seasons have to be taken into account for survival, and they are determined by the sun. The months, would be 12.3685 in a year, which would also necessitate an intercalary, but they would not be good for reckoning the year for common people. If one takes the year, as it's currently defined by the sun's cycle, which is 365.2435 days, and divide it by 29.53 days in a lunar month, one is still left with 12.3685 months in a year, which wouldn't reckon a year as well as the sun. There isn't a conspiracy. These measurements are difficult to reckon in a way that remains constant in calendars over time. The sun is the best keeper of time, hence its ancient name of Israel, Chronos, admitted by Eusebius, who cited Porphyry. As reckoning the year became more refined, it would be broken down into days, which are determined by hours, also reckoned by the sun and its absence at night. I've heard people claim that lifespans used to span centuries long ago, something I suspect comes from scripture. For example, Adam is claimed to have lived 930 years, Genesis 5 verse 5. But Lockyer noticed that might have been confused by people who reckoned years by the sun, interpreting months as years, which, if we regard the years as months, 930 months would be 77.5 years, a more realistic number regarding the human lifespan. He wrote, IB page 227, an interesting point connected with this is that, among these ancient peoples, the celestial bodies which gave them the unit period of time by which they reckoned were practically looked upon in the same category. Thus, for instance, in Egypt the sun being used, the unit of time was a year, but in Babylonia, the unit of time was a month, for the reason that the standard of time was the moon. Hence, when periods of time were in question, it was quite easy for one nation to conceive that the period of time used in another was a year when really it was a month, and vice versa. It has been suggested that the years of Methuselah and other persons who are stated to have lived a considerable number of years were not solar years, but lunar years, that is, properly, lunar months. This is reasonable, since, if we divide the numbers by 12, we find that they come out very much the same length as lives are in the present day, and there is no reason why this should not be so. There seems little doubt that the country in which the sun was definitely accepted as the most accurate measure of time was Egypt. Ra, the sun, was the chief god of ancient Egypt. He was worshipped throughout the various nomes. Even the oldest texts, cf. that of Menkora in the British Museum, tell of the brilliant course of Ra across the celestial vault and his daily struggle with darkness. Ranke wrote, Universal History, page 2, the Egyptians have determined the motion of the sun as seen on earth, and according to this the year was divided, in comparison with Babylon, in a scientific and practically useful way, so that Julius Caesar adopted the calendar from the Egyptians and introduced it into the Roman Empire. The other nations followed suit, and since then it has been in general use for 17 centuries. The calendar may be considered as the noblest relic of the most ancient times which has influenced the world. I'd like to know where in the historical record it demonstrates that Julius Caesar adopted the calendar from the Egyptians, especially since these locations in Egypt weren't rediscovered and excavated till the late 18th century. I broached the subject that Julius employed Sosigenes to do it, but in light of all the forgeries and things we just accept as true because we have no idea how to investigate them, this is something I'd delve deeper into if anyone can provide evidence. Please post in the comments if you have artifacts that'll help confirm these ideas. The only thing I can find is an alleged account from Pliny the Elder, Natural History, who wasn't even alive when this occurred. Lockyer concluded that it was nature, the cycle of the Nile that the welfare of Egypt depended on, and so the summer solstice and flood of that river are the turning points of the old Egyptian year. He wrote, IB page 229, what the Nile was to Egypt, the Euphrates and Tigris were to a large region of Western Asia, where also we find the annual flood a source of fertility, a spectacle which inspired poets, and an event with which astronomers largely occupied themselves. What more natural than that Euphrates, Tigris, and Nile were looked upon as deities, that the gods of the Nile Valley on the one hand, and of the region watered by the Euphrates and Tigris, on the other, were gods to swear by, that they were worshipped in order that their benign influences might be secured, and that they had their local shrines and special cults. The god sacred to the Euphrates and Tigris was called Ea, Enki. The god sacred to the Nile was called Hapi. The name is the same as that of the bull Apis, the worship of which was attributed to Mina. Maspero, History ANC 11. 10. Certainly Men, Mini, or Menes, as he is variously called, was fully justified in founding the cult of the river god, for he first among men appears to have had just ideas of irrigation, and I have heard the distinguished officers who have lately been responsible for the irrigation system of today speaking with admiration of the ideas and works of Mina. Whether the Tigris had a Mina in an equally early time is a point on which history is silent. But, according to the accounts of travelers, the Tigris in flood is even more majestic than the Nile, and yet the latter river in flood is a sight to see, a whole fertile plain turned, as it were, into an arm of the sea, with here and there an island, which, on inspection, turns out to be a village, the mud houses of which too often are undermined by the lapping of the waves in the strong north wind. I wrote in July's end with black swans. Ovid described it in Metamorphoses, upon her Isis brow stood the crescent moon horns, garlanded with glittering heads of golden grain, and grace of royal dignity, and at her side the baying dog Anubis, dappled Apis, sacred Bubastis, and the god who holds his finger to his lips for silence sake. Apis was a messenger of Ptah, but then became associated with his incarnation. He is also the son of Hathor. Apis is his Greek name, but before that, he was called Hapi or Hapi. During the Ptolemaic period, 320 to 30 BCE, his depiction as a bull god changed to a man with a beard, and his name became Serapis. Some claim Apis, the archetype, was depicted as early as 6000 BCE. His association with Hathor goes back as early as 3150 BCE, if you trust these assessments, which I don't. Serapis is the exact same archetype that Jesus was modeled after. Serapis, Apis, Hapi, being the son of Hathor is the same archetypal relationship of Jesus being the son of Mary, and Horus being the son of Isis, as well as many other names regarding this dynamic. Is happiness a state of being happy? To be happy is akin to light, while to be in sorrow is akin to being in darkness or gloom. Does happiness hide darkness? Does it hide in darkness? Is Apis covered or hidden? Does Hapi cover or hide something? Is he the hidden one, Ammonius? He was also Osiris Apis, which is the sun in winter or at night, the lord of the underworld. This equates him to Jupiter Ammon, God the Father, the hidden one, Ammonius. It's alleged that the Druids honored a spotted cow, a symbol of Apis, and that it was symbolic of the stars in the night sky. This type of cow was allegedly sacrificed on May Day, Beltane, in honor of Noah coming from the ark. This is the renewal of life in spring, just as Hapi, Apis, was a god of the annual flooding of the Nile that deposited the fertile soil on the riverbanks. This connects it to Bel, Abel, Nimrod, and even Jesus. Are you able to comprehend this? Krishna was a calf herder. Are cows not sacred in India? Does the sun not corral or define the stars of the zodiac? There are artifacts of priests of Osiris wearing a leopard cloak with the inscription, God's Father. God's beloved. Haiti. Haiti is allegedly the heart. Is this where the sacred heart in the Jesus imagery derived, Sacratissimum cor Jesu? What is that heart in the middle of? Does that luminary not correspond to Haiti? Are courage and heart not the same word in certain languages? Are lions not associated with both? What rules the house of the lion? Again, the symbolism of the Nile, the Muses, and Moses is encoded in Jesus. Nilus, Nu Epsilon Iota Lambda Omicron, is Serapis, who is Jesus, the god of the Nile, the banks of which Moses was found. 1 John 5 verse 6 reads, This is he that came by water and blood, even Jesus Christ, not by water only, but by water and blood. And it is the Spirit that beareth witness, because the Spirit is truth. Apis is Latin for bee, and an apiarium is a beehouse, a beehive. The keeper of keys keeps many secrets of that amber serum. This should help you decode the beehive symbolism used in Freemasonry, Odd Fellows, and other Abrahamic orders. The bishops of Serapis were the bishops of Christ. Hapi philologically corresponds to happy. Haiti philologically corresponds to hate and Hades. This is anecdotal, but not ignorable for those who can see it. If you seek proficiency in the universal system of priestcraft, as well as the empire behind it, read Spirit World and the Real Universal Empire. Become a member to access the rest of this article.